Welcome to the podcast, which is all about the world of direct response. Are we on the air? I'm your host, Shawn Wilsie, and for over 30 years I've hosted shows on cable shopping networks, and now I want to be your guide into this world as we look at the ever-changing nature of these industries, and changing they continue to be, especially with Invicta talk, still what everybody is focused on. I never thought the day would come when the departure of one brand from a network would become so huge. Easily, the last episode I did of this podcast, if you haven't heard it, go back and listen to that one before you listen to this one, because I'll be making reference back to it, has become the most downloaded ever in this is the start of season 4 now, so in the 3 completed years of this podcast. My YouTube has exploded because of this. And by the way, before I get into the topic of the day, I cannot figure this out. Let me pull up my YouTube statistics. You know, there's an algorithm that pushes through certain videos and certain things, and one of my good friends, I cannot talk to one of my good friends, Matt, makes his living off of YouTube videos. Matt Magnone, he does videos of claw machines and arcade games, and he literally makes his living off of YouTube. And he's been very vocal about these algorithms and how it will push through some videos and not push through others. So I upload all kinds of things. If you're not on my YouTube channel, just, again, search my name and it will come up. I can't figure out why certain videos get pushed more than others and why they get seen more. Outside of the actual podcast episode, which actually 1,944 listens as I'm recording this, a clip of Home Shopping, a commercial clip that I posted of Home Shopping Club 1992 for a promo has 1,730 views. Shop at Home 1986 Selling Anything, 1,413 views. National Shopping Club, which I think I've talked about for 30 seconds on this show, that 38-minute clip has 2,147 views. And then other things like Phyllis Diller selling face cream on Home Shopping Club. I thought that would get a lot. 211. Video Mall, an obscure one, 173. Value Vision, 1995, one of my bloopers, 143. So for some reason, thousands of people are watching a video of National Shopping Club. Anyway. But no, the topic of Invicta, and it continues it's been 3 weeks since I uploaded that last episode. I've had so many conversations about this topic, and that's why it's not going to bed yet, because since we've recorded that last show, they have had their final show on ShopHQ, and they have debuted their first show on JTV, and I'll talk about that when we get there. But I want to go through the timeline, because how is it that the departure of one vendor can now have conversation going about the future of an entire shopping network? And on the last show, we discussed how important Invicta was to ShopHQ. That's why I say, if you haven't listened to that one yet, go back and listen to it. How did Invicta become so big? I've said it before, I'll say it again. The planets were aligned. We will never see repeat what happened with Invicta and what at the time was ShopNBC. Invicta as a company, for those that don't know, started in 1837. Its original origins were in Switzerland. A gentleman by the name of Raphael Picard, he started the brand. So almost 200 years ago, that brand was started. Now, there were a lot of small watch brands back then, so it's not like they were one of the biggest names in the world of watches, but they survived for a long time. Obviously changing ownerships. He had it through 1837. And frankly, the ownership gets very vague after that. And I have spent more time researching this than I probably should have. So to find the lineage and who actually owned it after the initial owner is very difficult. I don't want to deal in gossip. I want to deal in facts. The only factual things that I've been able to verify, meaning through multiple sources. In 1959, the USSR, now known as Russia, hired Invicta to make watches for the Navy. We know that. We know that the quartz movement in the 60s and 70s hurt every watch company. All of them that did not keep up and get in tune with quartz movements suffered. Invicta was no different. In the early 80s, they went bankrupt. Whoever owned it at the time, they went bankrupt. But we know in 1983 it was sold to Ondix. They later folded the brand. And Ondix, Ondix, no idea whatever became of them. Honestly, I haven't looked. I don't care. But they folded. So now we get to the modern day history of this brand, which incidentally, just so you know, because you're thinking, well, I don't know, this is kind of weird, all these different owners. This happens to a lot of watch brands. Lucien Piccard, just in my lifetime, I have seen gone through numerous owners. Many groups wind up owning lots of brands. The Swatch Group owns some of the most legendary and famous high-end Swiss watch brands. Invicta Group owns many other watch brands. One of my favorite brands from the 90s, Techno Marine, is now under Invicta. So it's common in the watch industry that owners will come and go, that brands will change ownership, that there will be consolidation. And that's not going to stop anytime soon. That's going to continue. But what happened that put Invicta on the charts? We know in 1991 the brand was sold to A.L. Lalo's family. His dad, is my understanding, is the one that bought the brand and basically said to A.L., and this is through conversations I've had with A.L. over the years, Dad basically said, here's a watch brand, make it work. And that was it. And so now it was all on A.L. Lalo to make this watch brand work in the early 1990s. A few years into this, and we're probably into 96, 97, the brand had not yet hit ShopNBC. Now, you just think for a moment. You've been handed a watch brand. You're told, make this work. What do? This is the early 90s. There's no internet. You can't get buzz going through influencers. How do you make an inroad into the watch market? And remember, in the early 90s, it was still all about quartz watches. Digital, still a lot of digitals out there. Swatch had their time, and they were still big. So how do you make a watch brand successful? Well, there were a smattering of small television shopping networks. And Invicta made an appearance on one. And for the life of me, and I said this on the last show too, I can't remember the name of it, a guy by the name of Danny Blair, known as the Watch Commander back then, because he was selling watches on television, was working at this network. And I remember watching him sell Invictas. Invicta was out there doing their Pro Diver with an automatic movement. No one was doing automatic movements. No one. That had gone the way of the horse and buggy. It's all about quartz. So all of a sudden now, Danny Blair is on television showing this watch with an automatic movement. Guys, you're never going to have to buy a... Actually, how would you... Guys and gals, ladies, what was it he used to say? I can't remember. Let me come into your living room. I remember that. Here's an automatic movement. Never ever going to have to buy a battery for this watch. And all of a sudden now, even I'm getting interested. We weren't selling them at ShopNBC. It was Value Vision at the time. And so here's this brand I never heard of. Wow, an automatic movement watch. We were selling vintage watches, which I'll get to some other time. But we weren't doing anything like this. I bought an Invicta. I still have this original Pro Diver, and it still works great. It was much smaller than the ones they make today. But wow, this was really cool. A watch with an automatic movement. Now, slowly, other companies started saying, automatic movements, because the Japanese or the Chinese and Japanese both actually were starting to make them again, because this used to be simply a Swiss thing. But when the Japanese started making these automatic movements, Invicta was buying them, putting them into the Pro Divers very successfully. So this was baby steps. Now we're going to make a little jump here. We're going to fast forward, because this was mid-1990s. Fall, October 2002. And Invicta had done pretty well for itself. Small company, by no means was a household name. They now make the jump to ShopNBC. At that time, ShopNBC was the leader, and nobody ever caught up, in selling watches on television. That had started in the mid-1990s. We've got parallel things going on. You have Invicta on this small network, and then you have Tim Temple and myself doing watches on Value Vision, starting just by selling vintage watches. It was literally one-of-a-kind vintage watches. Boomer Time was one of the vendors, and I can't think of the name of the other vendor at the time. And then Lior became part of it, and he was getting in gray market watches. Gray market watches are legitimate watches, high-end watch brands. I bought a Concord from him. I bought a Corum from him. I bought some very high-end. And so we had a new CEO come in about this time, and he saw the growth potential in watches. Now, we'd been doing business with Croton. We'd been doing business with, I think we had Android at the time, some smaller watches. But Invicta was knocking at the door. They wanted to get on ShopNBC. Our CEO at the time saw the potential. We got a dedicated watch buyer to work with Invicta, and we started doing Invicta shows. And all of a sudden now, this brand was exploding. It was taking off. Croton, which had been really the big brand at the time, was starting to take a backseat to Invicta. Invicta's designs were a little bit more cutting edge. All of a sudden now they had this Lupa, which at the time was massive. By comparison to today's watches, not so much. And the Lupa put them on the map. They were still doing the Pro Diver. They were starting to make them a little bit larger now. So in those first few, what I call the formative years of Invicta and ShopNBC, by doing different things, and this is where I think the brilliance of the company really lied, through marketing, and I don't know if they did this intentionally or not, but slowly over time, they changed from becoming, you're buying a watch, to we're a collectible. And you're buying a collectible when you buy an Invicta. And I'm going to get more into that in just a second. So from early 2000s up until about 2005, they had this slow build. Then the third anniversary of Invicta hit in 2005. Now at this point, Tim Temple had left the network. He went across town to start up another network that lasted about a year. That's a whole other show. So I had become the dedicated watch host. A role I enjoyed as a watch person, but as someone with ADD, I got bored pretty fast just selling watches. And so I wanted to get back into gemstones and coins and all this. So they brought in a gentleman by the name of Jim Skelton to really become the watch guy. And we debuted him on the third anniversary Invicta show, and I think this video is on my YouTube channel somewhere. I can't find a backup copy, so I hope it is. And we debuted Jim. Jim really got his hands dirty with Invicta. And what he was able to do was to take this brand and put it out there on watch forums. Now again, this is why I say the planets were aligned at the time. This would never happen again. It could not happen again. At the time, watch forums, conversation forums, were becoming a thing. And he started getting Invicta mentioned more and more on a lot of the watch forums. And I shouldn't say a lot, because we're only a couple at the time. Today, I just did a quick Google search of Invicta watches in the words message board. There's watchtalkforums.info, watchuseek.com, watchtime spelled with a Y.com, watchforum.com, watchfreaks.com, omegaforums.com, 7post.com, no idea what that even is. Let's see, and page 2. bestdamnwatchforum.com, Invicta Watch Forum, proboards.com, watchlords.com, timezone.com. Anyway, it goes on and on and on. At that time, I remember Watchlords was in existence. Best Damn Watch Forum came later, and the conversations just exploded on these boards. It's like, oh my gosh, look at this brand that's doing something different. Oh my gosh, this is a brand for the early 2000s. Oh my gosh, look at the size of these watches. And suddenly, the chatter began. Now, as is my experience with every message board ever, they all degrade into negativity. All of them. I have yet to see one message board that has stayed positive. That's why anytime someone invites me to join a Facebook forum, I decline. I did this in the early 2000s. I'm never doing this again. Because Facebook forums can be just as bad. But anyway. So all of a sudden now you had watch forums, people on watch forums that weren't familiar with Invicta. They're tuning in ShopNBC. They're seeing this brand. Invicta was doing something different. They were making these watches larger, and now 43 became 46, became 48. I still remember the first time a 50 millimeter in diameter watch hit. Oh my word. Orson, do you remember that? Yes, he does. It was amazing. Now they're up even larger than that. And this is where I think Invicta, and I don't know whether Lalo intended to do this or not, he pivoted. And he started marketing these watches as a collectible and not as just a watch, not as just a timepiece. So the marketing on a new show would be, first time ever 58 millimeter case. First time ever this watch with a date display. First time ever this watch with a chronograph. Because he's taking the same approach that the collectibles industry had done in the 1990s. Little porcelain collectibles. It's like all of a sudden now we have the Precious Moments figurine and they're holding a dog. I gotta have that. They've never held a dog before. And so he's taking this approach. First time ever pro diver in diamonds. First time ever pro diver with sapphires. And it's building it now as a collectible first and a watch secondary. And now you had people buying hundreds of watches. Thousands, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of Invicta watches. So after that debut on ShopNBC and the message boards exploding the conversation, and Jim Skelton would take, he was a great photographer, say past tense, he's still alive, and he would take pictures and post them, and he was really exposing on these forums these watches. And the brand took off. And again, someone on in fact, speaking of message board, someone responded to one of my posts, I think it was on YouTube, saying Invicta shows used to be an event. And that was a beautiful verbiage because it was an event. They happened a few times a year. I remember the third anniversary event, we had a live jazz band in the studio. A.O. Lalo's in town, got to tune in, and the whole weekend would be cleared for Invicta. Again, it's still the mid-2000s. And the events would happen, the sales would explode, and then Tuesday would hit, Invicta's gone, and what are we selling now? What do we have? We got some jewelry, put some jewelry on. They had nothing else that really had that success. Computers were still doing okay. It was still the early 2000s. Computers were selling, but nothing else was taking off. Price of gold was starting to go up. Jewelry was not becoming an easy sell. And Jim Skelton, in fact, posted to one of my posts, I think, on Facebook. Remember how they would have a big weekend, like computer event, for example, and it would die. And so Saturday, he gets the phone call. Jim, we're canceling all the computer shows. It's going to be Invicta all weekend, so we need you. He'd have plans already made because he wouldn't do computer shows. Well, too bad. Cancel those plans. So Invicta started getting a lot more exposure and more exposure. And anytime you overexpose something, the sales start to slide. However, it was still the only reliable seller that they had. And I remember before I left in 2012, they tried to get Croton back in. They tried to get Android back in. Some of these brands that they had done very well with in the past. But they weren't Invicta. And the mindset was, well, if you're not Invicta, you're not going to get the airtime. And so Invicta got all the airtime. And so slowly all these other brands kind of got pushed by the wayside because Invicta was the only thing selling. It was the only thing selling because it was the only thing they were showing. And the promotion that Invicta got was amazing. Like I said, they had events. Huge event. It wasn't just this is an Invicta weekend. This is an event. Clear your calendar. And people did. And they also brought in Mike Davis at one point to be a guest, and he did a lot of shows with Jim. I worked with him once in a while. And Mike brought in the knowledge. Great guy, very knowledgeable. But remember, Invicta was all about this look. And I'm the first to admit that it's television, physical appearances and images are a big part of it. And I get the feeling that Mike just didn't fit the look that Invicta wanted with the brand. And so he was slowly shown the door. And the new management came in and didn't necessarily like the way that the shows were being executed because we were having a hell of a lot of fun doing it. So that had to change. And so now we had to have guests. And now we're entering into the picture Invicta Ryan. Invicta Ryan, one of my best friends in the world, and will always be that way. He had been a model for Invicta, but he was young, he was good-looking, and he was a watch guy. So this is like, okay, check 1, check 2, check 3. Let's get him on air as our expert, which for me was great because we were already best friends, and so we were just laughing, having a good time again, which management didn't exactly like around that time. But we had a great time, and the shows were consistent, and so now they needed another guest. Justin Zimmer, very well known now. He actually started as a graphics operator in the company. A lot of these people worked their way up. He was a graphics operator, then he got into the scheduling department of ShopNBC. First, he was the on-air guest for Lior, and Swiss Legend, I think, was the brand. And then he got pulled over into being an on-air guest for Invicta. So now you had your two guests, and now almost any host could do watches. They still like Kendi. I was gone, Jim was gone, Tim was gone. But the theory is now we've got two good, solid guests. We can bring in any host. So it started to lose some of that camaraderie, because when you had Jim and myself and Tim had left and come back, there was this watch geek connection that everybody had, and that kind of went away. But it was still a fairly consistent seller. So when that's all you have, that's why you saw so much Invicta. And I said this on a past show. Why do we see so much Invicta? It sells, frankly. It sells. Are they presenting it the way they used to? No. And in fact, it's funny, on the last show, I'm going to play a clip of that in just a moment, they have a message board that you could be a part of on YouTube. And I'd never joined it. And I thought, you know what's the last show? I'm going to join it. And a few people said hi, recognized me. Most of the names there, and these were the diehard collectors now in 2024, were not the diehard collectors in 2012 when I left, or 2005 when it was the heyday, just as most of the collectors from back then are not around anymore. So Invicta's constantly having to reinvent itself, and they seem to be doing it. I understand they've lost their Marvel licensing. They still have their NFL licensing and some other sports, so hopefully that will help. And I've mentioned on a past show, I think their biggest future is outside of the United States. When I go through the Puerto Rico airport in San Juan, there are not one but two Invicta stores there. And their retail had filed for Chapter 11 in 2023. So for there to be two functioning stores there's one still in San Antonio. It had been closed. It's opened up again. One in San Marcos Outlets here. This is all Central Texas. Had closed, is opened up again. So even their retail is humming along. But what is the future going to be at JTV? That's now the big question, because all of this community and all of this that I've been talking about is mainly men. Men don't watch JTV. So now the onus is on Invicta to get these men to leave ShopHQ and go to JTV. I don't know if they're doing that or not. In that forum, the last day when ShopHQ had their last show, there were still people who had no idea that Invicta was leaving ShopHQ and going to JTV. There were people who were hearing this for the very first time. So I'm promising you there are thousands of people clicking through the ShopHQ program guide saying, where's Invicta, where's Invicta, where's Invicta, with no idea that it's now on JTV. You don't have the watch forums anymore, or very limited participation in them, so you can't reach those people. So the onus is really on Invicta and JTV now. Get these old customers and get them over to JTV. I'm not sure for a guy shopping on JTV jewelry television has the same appeal that a ShopHQ or a ShopNBC did. Branding is a big part of a store. You have to have the right name to get the right clientele. Guys aren't real keen on walking into a Victoria's Secret, let's just say. Let alone, in fact, I don't have to go that far, into jewelry stores. Guys just are traditionally not jewelry store visitors. And so for a guy to watch JTV, that's going to take something. So this is where good marketing is going to have to come into play. What does the future mean for ShopHQ? That's the big question I keep getting. And people ask me all the time, what are their sales like? Again, I don't have specific numbers, so I can't answer that. They're going to try their best to get brands that are going to fill the Invicta void. Now think back to everything I just said over the past 20 minutes, because you just got 25 years worth of work that ShopNBC and ShopHQ did packed into 20 minutes. They need to take everything we just talked about in the next 20 minutes and not have 25 years to do it, but about a year to do it. They need to build new brands now that are going to have an immediate following, and not as a watch brand, but as a collectible brand, because that's what Invicta was able to do. We're not a watch, we're a collectible. Android was very close to doing that when Android watches were there, and I think they did it to a large degree. Croton was still just trying to be a brand. We're being Croton, and I love Croton. The people who run Croton are some of the best ever. But It has to become a collectible, and that's what ShopHQ has to figure out a way to do. They do, by the way, have one big advantage, I think, and that is one of their hosts, Aaron Kessler. I hope they build him into a watch guy, because of all the people there, I think he has the best chance. He seems to be keen on learning. He talks about watch movements. I'd like to see him get a little bit more scientific just to show that he has that expertise, that knowledge, because that will give him the credibility that network desperately needs, that there is a watch geek there, that there is someone that is speaking the same language as these collectors out there that know these things. And so I hope they build Aaron Kessler into something. I'm going to read my little departure here now, because I'm going to close with something. In fact, I'm going to close with the last 30 seconds or so of the final show on ShopHQ, just so you can hear the end of it all. I wish I had the first show. I don't. The oldest show I have goes back to about 2004, 2005, but we'll end with just the final 30 seconds or so on ShopHQ. So let me read all of this. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You never miss a show. Plus, you can listen to the archive of past shows. I hope you'll check me out on X, Facebook, and YouTube at Shawn Wilsie, my full name, ShawnWilsie, and on Instagram at SWilsie. Thank you for downloading this edition of Are We on the Air? We close with the end of Invicta on ShopHQ.
Okay, it is officially time.
I should mention the voices you will hear are Hannah Tim and the aforementioned Aaron Kessler.
Okay, it is officially time to say goodbye. Check out of your carts, everyone. We have had such a blast here tonight. I know I've only been here for a couple months, but man, oh man, has it been a pleasure, a thrill, and an absolute honor to be able to sit in on some of these Invicta shows. I know you feel the same way, Aaron.
Thank you, everybody. We have a lot of exciting things happening for you. Check out on your cart tonight. Thank you for collecting. Keep building a collection. We have a lot more in the future coming for you. Thank you so much for the final shows.
I'll be back with Constantine Weiss tomorrow. Thanks to all of our collectors out there. Have a fantastic night. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, I know, Travis. That's why we give such bargains.
Copyright 2024, King Bobby Productions, all rights reserved.